So I'm talking with the Treasury Minister Alf Cannan. Looking back to the budget, you seem to produce a budget that didn't excite too many people, but actually 4 people have voted against it. You must have been quite surprised. OK, Liberal Vannon was going to probably do that, but shock horror as a speaker, what was that about?
Well, first and foremost, Paul, I mean, I think it was a very detailed budget. There was a lot in that budget for people to look at, assess, digest. I think when it followed the fairly glossy headlines of the previous year when we raised personal allowances by £2,000, perhaps on reflection it didn't have the glamour about it that budget did. But this was a very important budget. Second year of this administration, it really did highlight our focus on our spending, ensuring that we are on track to return the island back into a surplus position so that money is going back into our reserves. And also it really was a targeted budget in which we sought to get the money into the areas that we felt needed it most: low income families, for children, for preschools, and quite a substantial investment in nursing care for the elderly, particularly those who are struggling to afford nursing care fees.
Okay, I mean, how did you describe the budget if you were sitting there watching yourself do it? I mean, how would you sum it up? Just steady as you go, sort of thing. I mean,
it very much wasn't steady as she goes. This was very much a budget that built on last year's budget of optimism and focus. It was a budget, as I said, that sought to tackle the issues, and it was also a budget that I think reflected the strength of our economy. We saw 700 more people registered for taxation and paying taxation. I think that's a very positive measure, and of course we delivered an £18 million surplus, and I'm putting £11 million back into reserves. So there was a lot of positivity around this budget, but of course there was notes of caution as well. There are still a way to go to get this deficit down. We're forecasting £67 million next year. But in terms of a budget of substance, which is what we've termed it, I think it delivered in that, and it delivered a number of positive measures for the community.
Okay, we mentioned the Speaker didn't like it, he didn't vote for it. Were you surprised at that?
Well, I was. I mean, it was quite a stance to take on the basis that he didn't think the budget had been transparent enough in terms of the way it was put together. He's been in the House of Keys since 2006. He's been a minister for the last 5 years of the administration. I hadn't witnessed him publicly standing up and voting against prior budgets, so it does call into question why he decided to do that at this particular point. And if anything, actually, we've tried to be more transparent about our budget delivery, particularly with the MHKs. I wrote to them all last year, invited them to put forward submissions into this budget, any ideas and proposals. They're also engaged as part of the departmental spending bids. They sit down with Treasury to assess where the department's at, talk about their new bids, where they think the department should be focusing its spending going forward. And of course they do get to see the budget some 3 weeks before the debate itself, so they do get plenty of time to analyse and assess what's in the
And the Chief Minister also said the same thing about why you have this chance to go in and talk about it. Therefore, is Parliament almost actually not part of the whole thing? The process has all been done in advance. Everyone's had a chance to see things, talk to you about it. So really, when it gets to the House, to the floor, is it really everything's known by almost everybody at that stage?
Well, a lot of people have had a chance to input, and I expect there'll always be things in a budget that people will disagree with or have differing views on. But it is a whole. It is you are presenting a whole spending proposition, and you can't. It's very difficult just to pick and choose items within the budget to try and pull out and vote against, because obviously anything that you do in that respect does potentially impact on the overall direction of the spending that is being proposed, and potentially has consequences for spending in future years. So I think there is enough transparency around the budget at the moment in terms of the consultation process that's taking place between Treasury and members. But of course, at some point, people need to make decisions, and it's my job, it's the Treasury's job to ultimately make those final decisions, to slot the pieces into place. to present that first of all to the council ministers to get their approval, and then obviously to take it to Tynwald. And I just don't see how 30 MHKs sat in a room are going to set a clear way forward for government when it comes, particularly when it comes to items like taxation. And I think that the resulting uncertainty from that kind of move would have both business and the community scratching their head every year, wondering what was about to come out next, because I don't think you'll ever get universal agreement on those types of measures.
Laurie Hooper, you know, didn't agree, but then that's probably was expected. But you removed him from the Save campaign. I mean, is that really needed? I mean, aren't people with other opinions allowed to express them?
Well, of course they are, Paul. But the Save campaign is a major pillar of the budgetary forecast that we've set out. We need to find to save £12 million as part of our proposals in order to deliver this changed budgetary situation so that we are in surplus. I just don't see how someone can come along with significant uncosted proposals that I looked at very carefully and assessed myself might cost as much as £14 million.
So he did come along with those ideas, did he? To you beforehand?
No, in his budget speech.
That was the first you knew about it, was it?
That's the first I knew about it. But when you're doing that and you're potentially proposing to significantly alter the way that government is approaching the challenges that it's tackling at the moment, when you're proposing significant public expenditure, when I think what you need at the moment is properly considered public expenditure that's targeted in the right areas, and you see the kind of universal spread of spending that Mr. Hooper was proposing, it doesn't sit well with what he's trying to do in Save. But more importantly, you know, as this subcommittee, Save, as I said, is part of delivering the targeted budget plans that we've had. And if Mr. Hooper can't support the budget, then I don't understand how he can sit in the Save team and purport to be seeking all these savings.
But he had been sitting there for months, and you didn't know that this was a problem, right? Until he stood up.
Absolutely. So, you know, again, it was a bit of a shock to hear his speech and to see the fact that he couldn't support the budget. And on that basis, I don't think we were left with any alternative but to ask Mr. Hooper to stand down, because primarily, you know, when I'm working with people or when the Treasury is working with people, we need to be confident that everybody is working towards the same end goal. And I think once that trust has gone, then it makes it very, very difficult for people to work inside a team or work inside the Treasury when you know that they don't support your plans. And look, I think it's healthy, of course, to have opposition, and Mr. Hooper's quite entitled to oppose Treasury spending plans, but he can't do both. He can't sit inside the Treasury and oppose plans. You know, he has, unfortunately, to do that from outside the department, because
well, he thought he could do it. Obviously, he didn't want to go. You got rid of him.
I think he's misguided then if he thinks that he can do both, because as I said, I think it's important that either council ministers are confident that people who are helping us deliver on our plans also support our plans. And if they don't, then I don't see how they can actually sit there and perform a function if we don't necessarily trust them to be on side in terms of getting to the objectives that we want to get to.
People with a memory over 2 years remember the old Alf Cannan, of course, who was on the outside of this tent, disrupting things slightly, should we say, let's put that politely, and now you're inside the tent and things change, don't they? You poach a gamekeeper and all that sort of thing?
Well, of course, there's always one thing being in opposition and another thing, you know, delivering. But, you know, I think that a lot of my criticism towards the council ministers in the previous administration was perhaps what I felt was a lack of a coherent plan, was a lack of recognition around the challenges that they were facing. And I think that, you know, a lot of the pressure that I applied at the time, or a lot of the points that I were raising, were eventually recognised. And I think certainly in terms of this administration and what we've done, I think I've recognised clearly, I set out the challenges that we're facing, I set out a very clear 5-year financial plan, now a 4-year financial plan to tackle those. But I didn't suggest for one moment to to Eddie Tier and others, that somehow he deliver huge uncosted spending plans, and I certainly wouldn't have expected to have sat round the table with him and 24 MHKs trying to thrash out what the tax strategy should be, because I just don't see how realistic that is.
How well do you sleep at night when you know the inside knowledge? I mean, where the money is it going to run out? The pensions and all that sort of thing. The amount of people you say are still moving in, yet we all have stories of people leaving the Isle of Man, in quite a lot. But how do you judge everything to be?
Well, the money's not going to run out, Paul, because we've got a properly costed plan in front of us that does require a certain amount of discipline, but will certainly give us some flexibility to get money into the right areas. And of course, under this government, we've reversed the trend of people leaving the island. We can see now clearly there are net inflows of people to the island, and we can see how effective some of our support mechanisms have been. Some of the funding that's been going into the Department for Enterprise has been in terms of helping businesses now grow their staff, and the latest business confidence survey will show that a lot of companies are seeking to recruit staff now over the next 12 months. So I think actually we're in quite a positive place from an economic perspective, and that we have and are starting to implement measures that are proving successful in terms of attracting people to the island.
But there's a chilly wind, literally, but blowing in all the time, that the UK seems to be taking on board all the things that we like to do before, and they're always now pressing harder to keep things there. The Alan Bell way of putting it was, we were having the crumbs off the table, and now the UK have gone for those crumbs as well. Do you still see that it's more challenging than ever?
Well, I think there's a lot of challenges around, and I think we would need to be absolutely aware of those challenges. That's why, from a budgetary perspective, we've been prudent in our forecasting for the next 12 months. We've been prudent in our income receipts forecasts. I think it's absolutely vital that we do that, and it's absolutely vital that we are not complacent as a government. Both in terms of facing up to the external challenges. That's why we'll be working very closely with the EU Code Group to come to some proper agreement around the substance definitions. That's why we'll be continuing to pursue our relationship campaign with Westminster
the substance definition
over Brexit.
It can't be that difficult, can it?
And that's why we're very keen to ensure that this year the survey that'll take place around VAT, the household and income expenditure survey, the business surveys that'll take place, are conducted in a thorough and efficient and effective manner. So we are taking a lot of steps to ensure that both prudent forecasting is taking place, and that we are coping well and dealing properly with the external challenges that are facing us. But let's not get too pessimistic about it. I think business has shown us in the last 12 months that they've been optimistic, that they've sought to address the challenges. They've overcome all the sort of negativity that we had towards the sort of mid to late part of last year, with all the negative press publicity. And people are progressing and delivering, I think, high quality products on the island across their diverse industries. It's really good to see, and we've really got to get on board now and help those businesses take the next step further in their development.
No tax increases? No changes to bans or anything like that? You're expecting no big shock horrors? Are you going to keep us a low tax jurisdiction?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to keep a stable taxation policy, because stable taxation is good for business, it's good for people, and it's generally good for the island. There have been some adjustments. As you know, last year I announced that the tax cap would progressively move up to £200,000 per annum. We are discussing now, and announced at the budget, that the 10% rate for banking would now extend to cover the whole of a bank's profit. It was partially covering their profits. There are elements now we think can be taxed at 10%. So there have been one or two adjustments in terms of our taxation income. But overall, I think it's absolutely right that we send out a message of stability in terms of taxation to our business community, and also to the people of this island, for whom increasing taxation to pay for public services is not something that's required at the moment, and that government should continue to seek proper efficiencies where it can.
Okay.
So there's still a lot to do.
Okay, just to finish, because we're doing some Monday morning. We've got MLC's hustings this week. You got your eyes on anyone particularly? Have you put anyone forward? You haven't, have you? Did you nominate anyone? No, you didn't. No. Any reason
for this? Well, I think that I am still frustrated that we have not got to a stage with the MLCs where I feel entirely comfortable about the situation. The Lisbane review has been somewhat watered down, although there have been some positive steps forward. I think we do need to take more steps forward in terms of ensuring that the MLCs are really there to do that proper scrutiny role around legislation and develop their scrutiny roles in terms of more broadly around government.
Are you happy with the sort of candidate, the quality of the people standing?
Well, I think there's got to be a lot of questions about the MLC election process. It seems to me now we've reached a stage where it's sort of half and half. Then that we've got multiple candidates coming forward, multiple candidates asking for people's support, and yet it's still now being managed internally effectively in the House of Keys. I think if we're getting to this kind of stage where these sort of applications now sort of half driven by some members of the House of Keys appear to me to be public reacting to some messages coming out that this needs to be a more open process, I think that maybe we now need to take the next step forward and make these fully public elections, because
super MHKs.
Well, no, because I think that's all about ensuring that the role is properly defined. But now we're in this halfway house. I just don't like the fact we seem to have sort of moved forward, but only just edged our way forward. I think if we'd followed Lord Desvain's recommendations, his recommendations were for a nominations committee. I think if there was a nominations committee now, looking more broadly out into the public, assessing the applications for these roles or assessing the recommendations for these roles and putting forward the shortlist of candidates to the House of Keys, I think that we would be finding this process would be run and managed more efficiently. You're
going to hustings, I presume, will you? And will you vote for some people, or will you just?
I'm sure I will.
You will.
For some people.
You will. You won't just.
Look, at the end of the day, the process is what it is. We need to fill these roles now. We need to, put people into place in the Legislative Council. So yes, I'll be studying the hustings meetings very, very carefully and looking at the individuals concerned and voting where I feel is appropriate.